Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. It is my turn to host the show today, and we're going back to the past. Samurai Jack. What Jack? Anyways, now that we got that reference out of the way, we're going to go back to even more in the history of professional wrestling, looking at one of the oldest territories and one of the more interesting territories of the 1980s. And here to do that with me is a man who defies professional wrestling with his podcast and trending. He is a man who enjoys the sweet, sweet green. Whatever that green is, it depends on what you think it is. And he is the man with me by my side, the host of the Court-Martail Podcast, the leader of the colony, Sean McCarty.
Well, folks, cash rules everything around me. Cream get the money, dollar bill, yo. And welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. As this man has very eloquently put out, I am your host, but I am sitting in the passenger seat here today because it was this man's idea who did not, even though I gave him the opportunity to intro, he did everything right except introduce who he was. But that man is the man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour, the host of our Mid-South Deep Dive, the one who suggested we do this, and I'm so thankful he did. The Bay Area Brawler himself, Skylar Greenberg. Thank you for driving us around the southern Louisiana, Oklahoma area.
Well, here's the thing, is that I don't think I need to introduce myself because everyone should already know who I am.
Do you know who I am?
Exactly. Now, real quickly, we're going to go to the Mid-South region in a second, but we are required to talk about a WWE pay-per-view that just happened. Now, Sean, you didn't watch it, right?
Yeah, well, I watched one match because it was Sunday night and I was just sitting around smoking my money. And I was like, you know what? It's like 10:30 at night. I know the show's on. I'm going to pop up and watch the last match. So I watched this last match and I'll give my commentary at the very end. But we've got some mail, and that mail is notes. And that male is small and lanky and pasty white. Roll his intro.
It's time for JoshAgeddon's Notes of the Week. It's time for his Notes of the Week. Oh, yeah.
Well, gather round for the podcast for our pay-per-view recap. Our PPVRECAP recap. And if you don't think we can review modern wrestling without despair, you're right. But it'll help if you just read my review. I see what he was doing. If I had actually read this, I would have actually played it on the guitar. That was supposed to be the campfire song.
Oh, God. We're going all the cartoon references of the mid-2000s.
And now that I've figured out... Okay, anyway. Greetings, all CMP listeners. JoshAgeddon here with another pay-per-view report for your Colonial... You got to refortify our garrison. For your Colonial champion. That actually worked out. Sean McCarty and the human Squidward known as Skylar.
Fuck you.
To sort through... I don't know why he in notes form always attacks you.
Because he always hits me with the references that he knows are right. Because, yes, I do view myself as Squidward. Because of how depressed I am.
Well, at least it's not because you're bald and have a big nose. Because that's why I identify as Squidward.
Here's the thing, is that I'm a Jew, and I got a nose, and I'm losing my hair, so...
Coincidence?
I think not. Anyway,
WWE had another premium live event, and it certainly was one. My thoughts are down below, and so is my penis. Read if you dare. And he actually did at the very end of this sheet. None of you can see it, and I'm not going to put it on this channel. He actually did put a little clip art dick at the very bottom. So That's how he feels. He put a bunch of random bold letters. Also, no, I didn't watch the pre-show. Pre-shows aren't people and shouldn't vote. I mean, but I did once again count the collar and elbow tie-ups, and there was only one on the entire show. Christ the pain. It'll be okay, Sean. It'll be okay. JoshAgeddon is here. Go ahead.
No, just continue.
Match 1, obligatory triple threat match for the Raw Women's Championship. Bianca Belair versus Becky Lynch versus Asuka. This was a good match. Can't be possible. Triple threat matches are never good. But not as good as everyone online has been saying. Seriously, this match has been getting a ton of praise online, and I don't get it. Mostly because Asuka was pretty sloppy whenever she was involved. Shock. And I know that is such a startling revelation that your puny mortal brain simply can't even right now. OMG. This isn't TikTok, JoshAgeddon. Stop sounding like young people. Becky is also just now. Also, she came out with a hat that looked like a dead Decepticon, so yeah. That happened.
What?
She still looks like a drugged-up, past his prime, wallowing in despair 2009 Marilyn Manson, which is pure comedy for all the wrong reasons. Bianca Belair is a goddamn star, not too much else to say. Match 2, another fucking Bobby Lashley Omos match. Please end me. Also, MVP was there because 2-on-1 handicap match. Why the fuck is Bobby still feuding with Nigerian Neanderthal? Damn.
That's an insult to Nigerians.
Yeah, and Neanderthals. When the fuck did Cedric Alexander become part of this unending feud? The world may never know. This is actually the best of the 3 Bobby versus Omanus matches, because someone other than Astronomical Failure was in there for a significant portion of the proceedings. Cedric cost MVP and Nigerian Khali the match, and Bobby won. Can we please have Bobby do something important? Please. On that note, Bobby is apparently going after Austin Theory and the U.S. title. Joy.
I mean, if anyone's going to make the U.S. title mean something, it's going to be Bobby Lashley, because he's the last person that made the U.S. title mean something.
You're not wrong. You are not wrong. Match 3, Kevin Owens versus Elias on roids. WWE often puts people in idiotic, kid-friendly Saturday morning cartoon feuds such as this one. What is this feud about, you may ask? Well, Elias has a new look and is calling himself Ezekiel, and Kevin Owens is mad because he isn't actually a different person. Garbage. Garbage, I say. Fuck these kid-friendly, TVG-rated feuds, and fuck the kids too. That said, this match is actually pretty physical and intense, and Elias got some hard-way juice. Owens won with a stunner because remember Steve Austin? He was cool. He was here a couple months ago. Remember when wrestling was fun? I don't. Well, just wait. This podcast will explain that for you. Match 4, Judgment Day versus the Nudgment Bay of AJ Styles, Finn Balor, and Liv Morgan. I will give WWE credit on this. They are better at trios matches than AEW is by a significant margin. In AEW, they are all the same mindless, let's do every move ever thought of in the span of 10 seconds trope. Whereas in WWE, tripe, I'm sorry, I said the wrong word.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Well,
it means
tripe is actually tripe is made of sheep's stomach, and trope is a. Never mind.
Well, they're both.
The context is the same regardless.
The context is the same regardless,
yes.
anyways.
Whereas in WWE, there is some restraint because WWE is let's be as cookie cutter as possible. I can't believe I'm now seeing WWE's dialed back style in a positive light. Do better, AEW. Facts.
I mean, the problem is that AEW set a very, very, very low bar that's touching the ground.
And a horribly bad precedent of just letting whatever the talent want to do happen.
Yep.
This match was okay, except for whatever Liv was in the ring, because please fall victim to budget cuts. And AJ Styles also bled hard way. Edge's crew won, which I believe was the correct decision because this group was just established and needs momentum.
And then Finn Balor joins and then kicks out Edge.
Yeah, the next sentence is, can't wait to see how far they go with Judgment Day. On a related note, on Raw, Finn Balor joined, then they kicked Edge out of the group for literally no reason. Not true. They need baby faces because Cody's injured. And instead of building an actual star, they decided, you know what? Let's just go back to Edge again because why wouldn't they?
Well, actually, that and another reason. Want to know why?
I would love to know why.
Because WWE wanted to make Judgment Day more supernatural, and Edge said no, so they overruled him.
Great. Can't wait to see what they do. Oh, right. I'm not watching.
I fucking hate it, Sean, that you called it the day after WrestleMania Night 2. When you said, Edge and Damian Priest are going to be together. I hope WWE doesn't creatively force them to suck.
Yeah, well, how many times have they done it in the past decade? I've come to expect that anything good that WWE does, they literally look at it, see that people like it, and go, let's kill it. This was, how long was this? 2 months? Since this started? 2.5?
Since Damian Priest joined, it was April, so it's only been literally 2 months.
That's pathetic. Anyway, someone he proceeds, JoshAgeddon does, to have an aneurysm in text form. Match 5, Madcap Moss versus Boring Corbin. No DQ. This match,
no holds barred.
That's right. This match was okay, I guess, but Baron Corbin is an intrigue vacuum, and while I like Moss's new look, he needs to ditch the name and get a better one. Give me a serious Madcap Moss with a serious name and keep him the fuck away from Corbin, and you have my attention and erection. Best part of the match was the fans wanting a table. Corbin getting one only to put it back under the ring, which got a ton of heat because the fans are fucking brain-dead morons who only care about stupid table spots. I would agree with this. However, we've seen in the past few watchings through of old wrestling in WWE, that has not been a recent development.
Well, it's not a recent development, but it's gotten worse.
It's gotten way worse. There were still people over back then. Now it's just the tables that are over. All right, we're almost done here. Austin versus Mustafa Ali for the United States Championship, match 6. Legitimately cannot remember the last time the U.S. title was on a pay-per-view. Also, and I had to look this up, the last time the Intercontinental Championship was defended on pay-per-view was when Apollo Crews beat Big E for it at WrestleMania 37 last year.
Wait, that can't be true.
On pay-per-view?
Hang on. You keep going.
What, you disagree with JoshAgeddon's research? What, are you cross-examining JoshAgeddon? Who are you to say that he didn't do his research?
I do, so give me 1 second. You keep talking.
Who are you? I do.
You keep talking.
Anyway.
Let me do some work, okay?
Let me go and try to disprove JoshAgeddon's articulately. This man had a degree in English, sir, and you're gonna doubt his research skills? You're gonna research.
I don't give a shit about his English degree.
Wow, damn. That's cold. He makes one insult to you calling you Squidward at the beginning of this, and now you're like, fact checked. Gotta fact check.
He called me Squidward, and I took it personally.
That's right, and I took that personally. Anywho, this was a pretty good Raw match, but it's still just a TV match, so not that interesting or noteworthy. And I did catch the last couple of seconds of this, and it was fine. The crowd was into it, surprisingly into it, I thought. But that was pretty much all I had to say about it. I only caught the last couple minutes or so. But while Skylar is furiously typing on his keyboard to make some sort of rebuttal or refutal of JoshAgeddon's notes, we go to match 7. Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins 3 in Hell in a Cell. Holy fuck, this man's chest and arm are fucking purple. How in the world can Cody stand this and actually wrestle in this condition? Cody took all the negativity he got in AEW and went, I'll make these fuckers like me or die trying. Accurate. But in all seriousness, Cody has balls of steel and should be applauded for his effort here. But whoever let him go out like this needs a square kick in the taint.
Quick thing: the United States Championship was defended at Extreme Rules 2021. Damian Priest defeating Jeff Hardy and Sheamus.
Well, there you go, JoshAgeddon. Do better research.
No, here's the thing. I think he may be right about the Intercontinental Championship.
Oh, that was the United States title.
Yeah,
You just mentioned.
the Intercontinental title. He may actually be right. Hang on.
Wow. That's that, but that actually makes sense because it was all on Raw and SmackDown. At least, because you know what? To be fair, though, Raw and SmackDown need a title to be defended on them. So I guess the Intercontinental and the United States title isn't the worst thing. It's just sad given.
Can you name the Intercontinental Champion?
It is the last one I
Without
remember.
looking at Google.
I'm not looking at Google. I don't do research. You know me. It can't be Nakamura or Zayn right now.
No.
Is it? It's Turdman Womblefuck. I don't know.
Gunther, aka Walter.
Is he really? When did he win it? What?
He won it on a random SmackDown.
What's happening here? Anyway, dear God, they're gonna kill. They're gonna
He
kill
beat
him.
Ricochet.
They're gonna kill Walter. I could tell.
By the way, it happened this SmackDown.
Oh,
Literally
okay. So that
yesterday.
was recently. Okay, so then that's fair enough. But I forgot that Ricochet had it, so there you go. Dear wrestlers, don't do shit like this. I have a ton of respect for Cody for this, but he shouldn't have been out there. Seth Rollins should also be given a lot of praise for how he protected Cody in this match while making it look brutal. No exaggeration, but this is probably the best match I've seen in several years and the best modern Hell in a Cell to date. This was better than Taker Triple H at Mania 28. I don't know about that. No match in years has had me glued to the screen while making me squirm like crazy. When Cody gets back, have him win the Rumble and beat Roman. Well, that's going to be saved for The Rock. But hopefully The Rock won't win the belt this time.
Well, the problem is that Cody had surgery. He's going to be gone for 9 months. Unless he has a John Cena-like recovery factor, he's not making the Rumble.
Well, it's also possible that they will have a John Cena-like recovery, but, you know, sometimes they do exaggerate these types of, like, durations of how long the injury is going to last, so then you're surprised when they do come back.
Dude, did you see Cody Rhodes' arm?
I watched the match. I was the first one to see it of the three of us. And I remember when he put down that jacket, which Cody is such a great fit for this format. He milked that jacket taking off perfectly, and I was like, oh no, oh no. And honestly, tons of props for Cody for taking this like a champ. But I understand why JoshAgeddon would say he shouldn't go out there, but if this didn't get Cody as much babyface points as humanly possible, I don't know what would. It was a good match. It's still a Hell in a Cell where the only blood came from Seth Rollins' arm. So, you know, you got to take that with a grain of salt, but at the same time, it was a good match. They did work hard, and really, they did do a lot of kendo sticks and all of that jazz that they do, but it was toned down for WWE standards, but they had to do that because there was only so much they could do with Cody wrestling with the condition he was in. But
even still, it was very, very good, and hey, Cody Rhodes is more over than he was before, so that's important.
Absolutely, and when he comes back, he is going to get the hero's welcome in a major way. Closing thoughts. This was a one-match show, and that main event will be talked about for years to come. The rest was your standard WWE B-show filler that honestly felt like a rerun of Backlash from last month at times. And there were only 7 matches as opposed to AEW's 9 billion. This show in particular really pointed out to me that there are some areas that WWE absolutely sucks at where AEW excels, while there are others where AEW sucks and WWE excels. If only there was a company that excelled at all or most and sucked at none or few. Like, and he said this in all caps, like, comment, and subscribe for the excellent booking of ACPW, NWL, and SCCG if you want that shit. Great segue. Next week, ACPW, NWL. What happened after May Melee? What's going to come out of that? NWL, I believe the World Cup is starting this month.
Yes, it is.
So you've got a
I'm
lot to see, and SWCG has got things. Has got Piper Niven kicking the shit out of everybody. So there's a lot to be paying attention to. Just like JoshAgeddon said, you gotta like, you gotta share, you gotta subscribe, you gotta change that bell button to all, so every time that we post, you know. But as far as Hell in a Cell 2022, it was honestly a 5 out of 10 show until that main event, which was so good that I have to add an extra 2 points. So largely due to the main event of Cody versus Seth, I give this show a 7. So to get on my good side, all you have to do is make your titties purple. Well,
Gross.
That's about as JoshAgeddon a review and response as you could possibly ask for. But now we can stop talking about the modern wrestling because we have more important things to talk about, don't we, Sky?
Yes, we do. And after listening to that garbage explanation of a terrible wrestling show by a terrible person
that got fact-checked, by the way.
Which got fact-checked. I need something to wash out my ears, clear my mind, and clear my soul. And perhaps that thing that clears my mind and clears my soul is some good music. Now, Sean, do you know of any good music that can help with that?
Well, I might, actually. When your ears have been befouled by Drek, when the green slime is pouring out of your ears like a 1990s Nickelodeon show, when you've got pain, a headache that's throbbing from the insufferable indemnities that modern professional wrestling has foisted into your earbuds, cleanse those eardrums, and not with Q-tips, folks, that just pushes the wax into your ear, but instead with a quality music, because it is time. It is time, it's springtime, and we're accelerating towards summer faster than the speed of a normal day, which is about 525,600 minutes, which is 365 days a year, which is 52 weeks in a year, and I've mentioned numbers, all of the numbers. Scott Steiner's somewhere. We've got a lot going on. It's springtime still, and you know what that means. A new era in entertainment has arrived.
This is pathetic, listening to you laugh at your own intro.
Well, maybe if I had kept it together, I wouldn't have to laugh at it. AB Production CT is proud to drag you out of the superficial monotony and overproduced, oversimplified modern musical mud pit, as well as meandering transitions and intros into the plug, with 2 industry-busting artists springing into action and taking the world by storm. Abizzle and Knux deliver an avant-garde approach to music that blends elements and instruments of a wide number of musical styles, including hip-hop, R&B, jazz, funk, rock, house, EDM, and so much more. It is high time for the music industry to be shaken to its core, so be a part of the foundation-breaking movement by supporting aspiring artists. And right now, you can catch the latest release, the single, for just a bit more, the Knux album releasing on October the 14th. The song is called Live As One, and you can identify it by the ring on top of the polymerization cover art that we have explicitly chosen. You've got a loved one, you've got a betrothed, you've got a girlfriend, you want to spend their life together, you want to say, hey, I love you. Perfect placement for it. Live As One, the single coming up for the album, just a bit more, October the 14th. And of course, we have the Mixed Bag 2 album by Abizzle coming out November. We have not specifically laid a date yet, but the single from that album should be coming out in the next couple of weeks or so, perhaps even about a month's time. But folks, the only way you're gonna know is to look for Abizzle, spelled Abizzle, or Knux, spelled White space Knux, on SoundCloud, Apple Music, and Spotify. For that and the entire AB Productions discography of over 100 songs and projects, including Retreat, Mixed Bag, Verses from a College Grad, Bear Min, Recovering, Rest Stop, and The Wax Apocalypse, and many more. All just a short click away. The links are in that description. Come join the entertainment revolution with AB Productions CT.
Good stuff, my man. Just get those headphones, put some earbuds in, listen, and forget all your troubles, forget all your worries.
And a small disclaimer, I will say that AB Productions CT music does not stop lingering, meandering transitions and intros to plugs Unfortunately, that was irrespective of AB Production CT and is in no way liable for long and unexplainable, nonsensical promotional pieces. Like that one.
Fair enough. Anyways, let's go ahead and get out of this for a second, and let's go to another transition. Now, me and Sean, when we were talking about doing episodes, we're like, you know what? We're tired of watching modern wrestling. So we decided the idea of, hey, let's go and do either like a style of wrestling watch, like Lucha, or we can go ahead and watch wrestling from the old days and do a territory deep dive. We will pick a territory, and we will watch like 4 or 5 episodes of the territory just to get an idea of what wrestling was like back then.
Get the flavor.
And how it's different from wrestling today.
Well, and we sure did pick one. And Skylar, I'm so glad you thought about this, because this was something that I wanted to do and I mentioned about doing back in December of 2020, prior to your acquisition and your signing on with the Court-Martail podcast. I had wanted to say, like, well, I've got all this free time. I'm going to do a deep dive. Let's see what we can find out. And then it just never materialized because the show got more popular. We got a very qualified co-host who is now running some things around here. And it took a year and a half, basically, for us to finally get into this deep dive and get into some reviews. And Skylar, the choice was yours for the territory this month. Explain why you chose what you chose, and what did we choose?
So we're looking at the various different territories of the yesteryears, and the one that stuck out to me as the one that we have to do first is Mid-South, because from what I've heard, Mid-South was a very big breeding point for a lot of professional wrestling greats. A lot of what 1980s professional wrestling was whatever Cowboy Bill Watts was doing in Mid-South, in Louisiana, in Mississippi, Alabama, parts of, I believe it was Tennessee, parts of Oklahoma, parts of Texas. That was the Mid-South area, but mainly Louisiana and Mississippi.
Well, Oklahoma was pretty well attached into Mid-South. They did kind of spill into Texas occasionally, and we'll talk about that when we get to the third episode, because there was a little, some collaboration done there with Houston. Not necessarily so much the Von Erichs and Dallas and World Class, but with Houston Wrestling and Paul Bosch. And
well, actually, the Mid-South had a very good relationship with World Class and got a lot of World Class wrestlers on their show, and a lot of the Mid-South wrestlers would go over there.
Well,
so
because
and them had a very good relationship.
Because there wasn't a lot of animosity between territories. You know, sometimes some guys just need to leave town. Hey, there's a landing spot. You know, let me get on the phone with Fritz and see what he's got going on. See if he could bring you in. We'll talk about that a little bit, because we had that kind of talent exchange on one of these episodes. But we chose 5 episodes, and by we, I mean me. And the reason I chose them as opposed to Sky, up to this 5 episodes, have you watched much Mid-South?
No.
Okay. Now, most of these episodes I'd either seen parts of, or I had seen the whole episode, or the tagline of it was tantalizing enough to make this interesting. So what I want to do with this is basically go through all 5 shows. I did not necessarily write down astute notes about who faced who when it came to jobbers. You know, it was more overall impressions of these 5 shows. So we will start in December of 1981, December 12th. And we tried to do one of pretty much every successive year from 81 to 85. Because there was a lot of things that changed between 81 to 85. And I do have to say, pretty much every one of these shows felt different. Not necessarily with the format, but with how the show's entire tone felt.
But we also need to remember what this was at this point. So the territory, the Mid-South territory, had existed since the 1950s and was part of NWA Tri-State. That was the official name for the territory.
Right.
Until Cowboy Bill Watts, a star in the 50s and 60s and 70s, bought the territory in 79, rebranded it as Mid-South, and ran it from 79 until 86, until it became Universal Wrestling Federation, or the UWF.
Yes, sir.
But you can definitely tell, especially with 81, that there were still things that they were working out. But they got, I want to say they got better as time went along.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. you could tell, I mean, it'd been a couple years, right? But you could tell in 81 what Bill Watts' idea of presentation was, which was really, you want to talk about sports-based presentation. This is how you do it. And Watts himself was a big proponent of that, although we didn't really see much of him or any of him in the first episode.
Well, not in the first episode, but we did later on.
Yes. Oh, we saw a lot of Bill Watts later on, but here in this first episode in 81, we got almost none of it. But the person we got instead, I want to do a specific deep dive on, because there is something really, really fascinating about Big Cat Ernie Ladd.
He has one of the most fascinating voices. I just love listening to Ernie Ladd.
Yeah, you get mesmerized in it. Even when he's doing his heel stuff, talking about managing Alpha and Sika, you're like, man, I just love listening to Ernie. He's a perfect guy for a guest play-by-play. I don't know how many times they alternated people on and off, which happened pretty frequently, but for the first 3 episodes, there was one constant.
And what was that constant?
Boyd Pierce.
And his dazzling suits.
And Boyd Pierce was one of the most immaculately dressed people in Mid-South. But did you notice, Sky, that for the first 3 episodes, he literally was there only as the framing device?
He didn't talk. He let the color commentator talk.
Like, at all. Now, half of the time, that was just because Ernie Ladd was just going off, or Bill Watts was just going off. Boyd Pierce he did not have much words to put in edgewise, except, oh, that was crazy, we'll be right back. Oh, welcome back, this is what's coming up next. And you need a guy like that, right? You need somebody who's that kind of glue that puts the whole show together. And Boyd Pierce, he was good at being the complete straight guy and let the wrestlers talk about the wrestling.
Yep. So, who is the announcer? Not Jim Ross, but the other guy.
No, the in-ring announcer is Reeser Bowden, who I thought also added to the legitimate feel to this show. Because everything was just, right down the middle. This is what's happening. This guy's in this corner. This guy's in that corner. All right, let's get it on. And that was it.
He does become more involved later on, but we'll talk about that when we get to Jim Cornette.
Yeah, and that's a little bit different. But for the most part, he stayed pretty much, as it were, the straight man. I'm here's the announcer. This is a sport. This is a contest between 2 people. And the first one, we get Brian Blair, who got a surprisingly large reaction against somebody.
The monk.
The monk. And again, like I said, my notes were not that descriptive, because you could, tell me if I'm wrong, Sky, you could tell who was important and who was not all the time on this show.
It was very easy to tell. It also, you could tell, especially like the first 3 or 4 episodes, that they were kind of all formatted the same in how their matches were, which is basically go out there and wrestle like a 3 or 4 minute match.
Yeah. And I like that. I mean, I like having matches, because what that does, you have 2 or 3 of those, no matter who's important and who's not. All of the matches still look like they look like an actual fight. They look like a struggle. Now, some people were better at it than others. That's a fact. And you could tell when the quality of wrestler improved versus the schlubs that they had fighting some of the stars.
Especially this first episode. The contrast between this match and some of the later matches is very pronounced. Again, Brian Blair wins the match against the Monk. The Monk was a gimmick.
I don't know why Brian Blair had that King George III haircut, though.
It's the 80s.
It looked so bad. I'm like, I like Brian Blair. I liked him as one half of the Killer Bees. But
It's 1981. Don't blame the guy.
I know. I'm just like, still... It was enough for me to comment on it, but it was I loved the finish of the match, though. That's such a weird finish, to have that kind of, like, abdominal stretch back suplex.
Well, again, this is also at a time when moves that finish matches were kind of, I don't know. They were not as pronounced as it is this time. Like, in these days, a finisher usually wins, or an uber finisher or whatever.
Yeah.
any regular move could win a match.
And I liked that. I personally like that. It makes it feel like, oh, somebody could catch somebody at any time. It adds to the legitimate feel to it. Like this entire time watching all 5 episodes, especially as the episodes got better as the years went on. I always sat there going, man, the only thing I've ever wanted, and Sky, you've heard me say this about 1.5 jillion times, as have most of the people, but we got a lot of new listeners. The only thing that I really want and require in my professional wrestling is the ability to suspend my disbelief, to believe that people are mad at each other, want to fight each other, and that it's an athletic contest between 2 individuals.
Fair enough. Now, let's get to the second match.
Yes.
Tom Ernesto Jr. versus King Cobra.
What was that piss yellow robe that Ernesto was wearing?
It was not a good robe.
Wasn't a good look. But I'll tell you what, this is one of those times when I noted Ernie Ladd does a great job of putting both guys over as athletes.
Yep. He's a very good talker.
Yeah, and King Cobra, I mean, he had a good look, but his most of what he did was kind of blah. I thought he didn't really have that very many good punches. He sold missing very well, but that's about as much as I could give him credit for. But this was kind of early into King Cobra's career, and we didn't really see much of him during
he wasn't.
this.
He was what, he was in his mid-30s at this point?
Cobra?
Yeah.
Well, then that's a little sad then.
I mean, you want me to look him up?
Actually, if you would, because I seem to have thought that Cobra was actually not that involved in wrestling up to that point. That it was only been a couple years, but I could be wrong.
So he was born in 1948. So by this point, he's
in his 40s.
Yeah, and he started wrestling 3 years ago.
Okay, all right. So there you go. So that kind of that further explains the point. So,
I mean, that missed dropkick botch.
Yeah, that was bad.
He literally just jumped in the air, and Tom Ernesto Jr. did a very good job of no-selling it.
Yeah. There were the dropkick game in Mid-South was shady at best. Some people nailed it. Others, Yeah,
and then this finish sucks. Like, King Cobra does a backdrop, Tom Ernesto Jr. kicks out, and then King Cobra headbutt.
That's all it takes sometimes.
Didn't connect.
Well, yeah, everything that Cobra did not look that good. It was. I don't think it's the headbutt that's the problem. It's the fact that it was very obviously not an actual headbutt, and it wasn't convincing to look at. That made it kind of blah.
Yeah.
Especially for like a match 2, when most of the big major events happened in the middle of these shows. Which is odd to me. I found that very strange. You know, with the exception of the 5th and final episode, and even not even then really, but even everything happened that was important in the middle of the show, for the most part.
It felt like they booked the main event in the middle of the show and then put the second or third most important match at the end.
Well, especially because a lot of it was going to be just like, oh, well, we're going to go until the TV's done, but when the TV's done, the bell rings. So and we'll talk about that in a second because that was used quite a lot.
That was a running joke. Like, do they ever end the show on time?
Yeah, well, fortunately. But you know what? It is a good cop-out. You get action, but if no one's able to beat each other, oh well. You know, it's a draw.
If you do it every single time, then it becomes lazy. AKA #bad formatting.
Yeah, well, we might have just fallen on the happenstance of picking 2 that ended up having that, but I would wager that
it was 3. It was 3.
Yeah, I would wager that if we kept watching more Mid-South, we would probably see a lot of that. But you know what? It was a different time for a different kind of television, so we got to take that with a grain of salt as well. But I don't disagree with you there. Then there's Jimmy Garvin.
But we get to the third match, which was arguably the best match of this episode. Jim Garvin versus Ed Winowski.
And this match was surprisingly good. The people were really behind Ed here, which was a surprise. I mean, Garvin, I always thought that Jimmy Garvin looked way better now than he did all roided up with Michael Hayes in the late 80s with the reborn Freebirds. That
Well, steroids are steroids.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true, but he looked better here. He was very agile. I've always liked Jimmy as a wrestler. His style screamed heel, and Ernie Ladd was doing great establishing that.
Even though at the beginning you're like, you want to cheer for Jimmy because he is the smaller guy, but then he was just, the way he was working the match was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I realized something. The crowd interest in the territories, especially at this time, didn't translate as well to television as it probably did in the arena.
Yeah, because I feel like the fans at this point, they were more like baseball spectators. Like, they're watching, but they're not on their hands and feet.
Unless some shenanigans go down. And then they get hot.
Go down, or a real big star is there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
which we'll talk about later on, but
yeah, and it was definitely also known as like and then Boyd Pierce is like, oh, he dumped him out on the cement floor.
Yep. Now, by the way, do you know this place that we're doing the show from?
I actually forget what arena this was.
Give me 1 second while I look this up.
Well, you can't just say you want to know where this was and then not have the answer.
No, I'm kidding. No, this was at the Louisiana State Fairgrounds, the Boys Center or something. It was a rec center.
Yes, which they used a lot. Mid-South did.
No, it was their base of operations.
Yeah. So that was their way to do it. And honestly, it was a good venue for it because you still had a lot of people. It always looked full, even if it wasn't like a monstrous spot, but that was also because of how well the lighting was and how low the definition was.
Right, and it was also an issue of the construction because you can clearly tell they have fans on two sides of the ring, and the third and fourth side was where they had people coming from. It wasn't like other wrestling arenas where you have fans all over the place.
Right, and that honestly I think helped the wrestlers too, because then you kind of knew what the side the camera was and what the side the people was and all of that. Then there was such a blasé ref count. That was one of the problems I had with the early 80s ref. And actually, a lot of the ref parts, that ref count was so like, 1, 2, all right, we're done.
That's the one thing that definitely has improved over the years, that the referees of the 80s were very bad.
Well, I thought that Carl Fergie did a pretty good job when he transitioned from wrestler to referee, and we'll talk about him in I think another episode from now. But that was that. I thought the officiating, it was just difficult because it wasn't mic'd well either. You know, the microphones were iffy in Mid-South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when we get to the next match. In this match,
Now, this was but this is before Iron Sheik, right? We're talking about the one that happened last week with I kept writing down JVD, which I mean by Junkyard Dog, but Iron Sheik, if you ever hear Marty Jannetty's story about the Iron Sheik always called him JVD. So I wrote it down as JVD, but we're talking about the Junkyard Dog.
Yeah, the Junkyard Dog in a tag team match. Now, of course, the tape cut halfway through because the tape was damaged. Right,
and we also got the previous show, which was the Junkyard Dog versus Terry Orndorff, where they did. There's no disqualification, so Paul Orndorff can go in and get hit and punch Junkyard Dog, but then Junkyard Dog throws Terry over the top, but that's a disqualification because that's a different kind of disqualification? I'm confused.
Again. Right, and then there was the whole thing of a wrestler underneath the ring and the switching of the masks and all that stuff.
It was a little, it was a whole thing. And then after all of that, Junkyard Dog gets an entrance because he's being pushed, and Dog was one of the biggest baby faces that Mid-South had. People do not recognize just how insanely over Junkyard Dog was for Mid-South.
Right. And of course, the thing about it is that Junkyard Dog is over because of the fact that he is black and they're in a predominantly black area.
Yeah, but it did. That was irrespective, though. I mean, yes, he definitely catered to a black audience, but definitely the rest of the audience caught on to Like and Dog. It just once he was great display. He had great charisma. You know, when it started being a little bit more drugs and a little bit less dog, you know, that kind of changed things a little bit.
Well, we'll talk about that as we keep going through the episodes.
Yeah,
because in the
yes,
first
we
episode,
will.
He was actually pretty lean and he was pretty well put together.
He was in great shape. And here's the thing, this tag match, this was not a tag match. This was an angle because there weren't any tag rules and the referee stood there looking like Rick Knux.
Yep.
It devolved very quickly. Junkyard Dog just took people out and won convincingly.
Literally, there was no tags. Junkyard Dog just came in, grabbed someone, slammed them, and won the match.
That was it. And the referee's like, all right, I pin him now. And that was it. This was the closest thing to AEW that Mid-South presented. Well,
maybe this is what Tony Khan was watching when he was watching.
That's right. He only watched that match, this specific match, and he's like, you know what? That's what I want my show to be.
And Junkyard Dog pinned the illegal man, technically.
I didn't even catch that. That's actually really funny.
When I was watching, like, they never made a tag to each other, so he tagged the illegal man.
Yeah. Didn't matter. It was just for Dog to keep getting over and keep getting wins. But it was an angle that blinks so fast and you miss the lack of logic.
And speaking of lack of logic and blinking before you miss it, here comes the Iron Sheik versus Buddy Ryan and basically a squash.
God, I love the Iron Sheik prior to 1984. Every time I see him, it's like his attitude, his demeanor's different. It's like his whole thing is like he's a lot more intense, I guess would be the way I'd put it. You know, he was intense in WWF, but he didn't look as threatening as he does here in Mid-South. And I wish we had got to see some more of Sheik in Mid-South. Because
it's possible that we just missed a couple of episodes that he was in. But again, the Iron Sheik intensity here, the fire, the passion, he really, really wanted to win.
Yeah. And they did something throughout this whole match where they're like, all right, folks, you can call in for your dream match. Do you want to see Andre the Giant? Do you want to see Dusty Rhodes? Well, call in and tell us who you want to see, and we'll give you the results of the dream match. And what did you think about that, first of all, Sky?
Well, you're trying to get fan engagement, so...
Well, I have two questions about this. One, do you think that was an actual shoot poll? Or did Watts just have a plan to pick two people and that was the dream? And like, this is what you fans chose.
Well, obviously it was not going to be a shoot because they had to pick a specific person.
But if they picked two people, because then that's my follow-up question. What if the fans were like the fans of 2022 and picked Mike Jackson versus Buddy Ryan? Then what?
That wouldn't have happened because Buddy Ryan would have lost. If anything, it would have been something stupid like Dusty Rhodes versus the Andre the Giant. Two baby faces.
Yeah, well, perhaps. It depends. But it would have been interesting to see anyway. I don't know whatever became of that. I didn't watch enough of it. Maybe we'll have to go back and watch more to kind of get the answer to that. Maybe just because it has the name Dream in it, maybe that meant Dusty was a part of it. I don't know.
We have to remember again that technically Mid-South was not aligned with the NWA, but they did use them, so I don't know why.
Yeah, the world may never know. But you know what? We found out some information in this matchup because apparently the reason the Iron Sheik's boots are like that is because he kicks camels with them.
We finally got the answer to the question that I had when I was watching, like, Iron Sheik's booties. Why are they booties?
Yeah, so where's your excuse, fucking Xavier Woods? Are you kicking camels? That's not acceptable in 2022 now. You know, that's the kind of thing that gets your ass canceled.
Right. Well, speaking of things that could have gotten them canceled, they have men versus midget women.
This was ridiculous. By the way, that back suplex from Iron Sheik looked fantastic.
It always does.
It always does. This was a match billed as the little girls versus the big men. What?
And the men were not that big.
And no, they weren't. But I will have to say this. Props to Ernie Ladd for staying professional about the women as well. And talking about it like it was an actual contest between two women who, two smaller women who wanted to beat the piss out of each other. And they sure did. They were laying it in. I don't know whether you noticed that. It was one of the most realistic little women fights I've ever seen in my life.
It is, but it's also, it definitely screams freak show.
Oh, well, but that's just calling back to wrestling's roots. I mean, it was a carnival attraction, basically.
Yeah.
But in any case...
yeah. Also, the fact that nobody could color coordinate, one team has black and blue, the other team has black and blue, like, come on, guys.
Yeah, well, it's not like they were going to have a return match for this. So it's not like they were going to be a tag team going forward. But I love the Finley Cannonball. That was the finish to this. And
that she didn't even hit the other girl with.
No, she kind of hit her with it.
If you watch, she didn't touch her at all.
Oh.
She literally jumped and landed and didn't touch her.
Well, that's being safe, I guess. I don't know, Sky. I'm reaching here. Let me reach.
Do you even know the girls' names?
It's funny because as I was talking, I was trying to recall them.
Rick Ferreira and Lil Diamond.
Was
the heel team.
Yes.
And the other one was Barbie Doll and some guy.
Barbie Doll and some guy.
Tony Charles.
Tony Charles, that's right. Now, Tony Charles, he was around, but it was obviously not a name of significance, but I have seen Tony Charles in other situations, not any like this. But this, that was a match that happened.
Yeah. But let's talk about the real match that happened. That was head and shoulders, probably the best actual match on the show, if you're not counting the Ed Winowski and the Jim Garvin match.
Yes. Ted DiBiase versus Paul Orndorff.
Now, this was after DiBiase was in WWF at the time and was the North American champion and lost it to Pat Patterson, and then that became the Intercontinental title. We
reviewed that show. We reviewed that match.
Yep.
On the Court-Martail podcast.
A couple years more experienced DiBiase.
Yeah, and you could tell. I think that he had gotten a lot of good work in. You could tell that the talent level had increased almost immediately. I've never seen Paul Orndorff that fast. Again, pre-steroid WWF wrestlers were quality.
Well, no, pre-steroid AW Mid-South wrestlers were better. This was a match that was surprisingly fast. I think because the other matches were so slow-paced.
Yeah.
This one came out of nowhere and surprising.
And it was honestly quality, except, I don't know, Beardless Ted is always weird looking to me.
Well, that was before he found his stride.
Yeah, well, you're definitely right on that. It was just, at this point, it's always an odd look.
Well, that's the thing of that. We're watching this show, and we know what happens in the future with a lot of the guys and girls that we're watching. So it's kind of weird. Now, here's the thing. Any WWE fan, and I say that specifically, who's grown up on WWE only, has only ever known the $1 Million Man.
Right.
Or, what was it? Hacksaw Jim
Yeah,
Duggan,
we'll talk about Hacksaw Dugan.
Or Tony Atlas's laugh. Ha, 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 ha. They need to go back and watch this and watch them when they were better.
Yeah. Because honestly, this is... And Watts, I always said... Kind of like you said, Sky, at the opening of this. Watts always brought out the best in people. He knew how to bring out the best in people without making them so over the top that they just seemed overly gimmicky, like what WWE did. As hokey as some of the stuff was on here, it all still felt like legitimate competition.
Well, they didn't do anything that suspended disbelief or tried to
break
the rules to get a thing going.
Yeah. And I loved the complete speed of this whole thing. And then the figure 4 into the counter with Ted pulling on the canvas in pain and agonizing pain. The crowd was really starting to get into it. Ernie Ladd and Boyd were actually doing a really good job of selling how painful it was and how difficult it was. Then re-reversion, and of course, time's up.
Yep, and it was a title match, and because time's up, neither man. Well, the title doesn't change hands, but we get an unsatisfying finish.
Right. And as ACPW has demonstrated, draws can be very, very, very useful. So I don't blame them for quitting TV time by having a major match like this end in a draw. A, because it's as frustrating for the fans, so they want to buy a ticket and watch when they actually do have the belt change hands. And two, because nobody gets hurt in the process as far as what their gimmick is and what they're trying to and supposed to be doing.
Right. So that was the first episode, and boy, we gotta start speeding through these real quickly.
Now, honestly, with this show, the reason it took so long, because it was fine, but for the most part, it was pretty boring. I thought was 81.
Agreed. It gets better later on.
It gets much better, and we move on. And what I tried to do here was make it at roughly the same time. The only difference is 84, but that's because there was a key angle in that I wanted to make sure we got the chance to see. But this was December 18th, so a year and 6 days after our first show, December 18th, 1982. We have Boyd Pierce, the human plot device, is there with Cowboy Bill Watts, who is on commentary, who is also very good on commentary. He's not Ernie Ladd, but he is Cowboy Bill Watts, and I like both.
Although he had that very much stare into the camera, dead eye.
Yeah.
And also the fattest face ever. And they opened the show with the whole thing of there's a wrestling mask that was found. And it looks like Mr. Wrestling 2 mask that has blood on it.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that was kind of silly. Like, I don't know who's responsible for this, but this is the kind of thing we don't tolerate in Mid-South. I'm like, but it's just a mannequin head. Like, what's the deal here? But they tried, but instead, we get our first match, which is Chavo Guerrero Sr. versus Marty Lund.
It's weird seeing Chavo Guerrero Sr. so young.
So, forcibly throwing your opponent over the top rope is an automatic disqualification, but launching yourself over the top rope and a dive is not.
Because you're throwing your own body, not the opponent's body. So you are taking the risk.
Right. So here's one of the interesting things about doing these 5 shows. It has definitely made me understand the over-the-top rope disqualification better. And because I've only used it a couple of times in ACPW, but I've come to understand it more now than I did before. Or at least the way fair. Bill does it.
Yep.
I don't really have much to say about the match. Is that Chavo did a dive and then he won with an unflattering move. I remember it wasn't that pretty.
It was basically, I don't remember the move.
Yeah, but it was unflattering and Chavo won. That's all you really need to know.
Wasn't it like a front drop kick from the top rope?
Something like that. It was something more Tex-Mex, if that's how you describe it. Then we get
he did a Rolling Thunder.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's right. But it still looks kind of blah. But it doesn't matter because Chavo got the win, which was obviously the point the whole time. Then they get,
and then the next match.
What the hell was Kamala's music?
Kamala very easily could have been a very, very. Actually, it still probably is a very, very racist gimmick.
Yeah, but somehow it worked. It worked for the flavor of the time.
Yeah, even though that spear barely looks any better than Apollo Crews' spear.
No, I had the same thought, actually. And then Bill Watts, he was like, that's the spear that he puts his people's trophies on. And then that's his spear of victory. And I'm like, what?
Not to mention they have all this stuff that's on him. It took longer to take all the stuff off him than it did the actual match.
Yeah, Kamala's just all over Lester McMulligan, man. Who was not very good at all, by the way. His bumps were bad.
Oh, yeah. And that gear was terrible.
He was not good. And you want to talk about the epitome of a jobber. Kamala beat a jobber. That's really all you need to know. Then we got more important stuff coming up.
Yep. This match was really interesting to me.
It is Ted DiBiase and Doink the Clown.
Fuck you. We are calling him Matt Bourne.
It's Matt Bourne. It's Matt Bourne. I just wanted to get the pop for Doink the Clown. It's Ted and Doink versus Mr. Wrestling 2 and quote unquote Stagger Lee, aka Mr. America.
No,
but
know who it is.
But it is the in fact JYD.
I find it weird that Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne have to start in the ring, even though they're the tag team champions. And
Dog gets an entrance. He's always got to get the entrance.
Dog and Mr. 2 get the entrance.
Yes. Wrestling 2, and it's amazing. Wrestling 2 is in his 50s in the 80s. And he was still putting on matches. We saw 2 of them in this stretch. 2 looked great for a dude in his 50s.
Hey, Mr. Wrestling 2 can do some amazing things.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, he was what? No, actually, you are technically incorrect. He's only 49.
Well, practically 50. By the time we get to next year, he is 50.
By the way, the funny part is that they introduced Mr. Wrestling 2 and Stagger Lee, and they're both champions. Stagger Lee has his belt. Where's Mr. Wrestling 2's belt?
He's busy wrestling. That's not on the line. He doesn't have to bring that out. He's trying to win belts. He's not trying to defend his.
And they were fighting for was this a title match?
Yes, it was.
And then it's a hot start. Most of the matches, by the way, did start with collar and elbow tabs, except for heated matches like this one that got hard starts.
Only when the time or the circumstances called for it. I got no problem with hot starts if the circumstances call for it.
Yep. Also, you can tell that this was getting better because the television quality was getting better a year later, and the first mat in '81 was really bad. This mat was actually at least decent.
Yeah, and then they did the crowd got into this match. I thought it was structured really well. I mean, as far as shine the baby faces, get the heat, make the comeback. The comeback time to the finish time was what, 45 seconds?
If that. It was maybe a minute.
That. Yeah, and it was fantastic. I love that. Quick comeback to finish times is a great way. Get in, get out, do what you got to do, and let it be over. Instead of another 5 minutes of wrestling that completely defuses the firecracker that you've lit.
Yep. And then Mr. Wrestling 2 and JYD win the tag team championships?
Oh, no, you're right. This was a non-title match, and then they're getting a title match next week. You're right, Sky. It was a non-title match. They win the belt. They don't win the belts, but they compete for the belts the following week because that was part of what the tagline was to go watch next week.
Yeah, and by the way, they did not win.
And they did not win, but there was, and I would imagine the Rat Pack got involved, and we'll talk about that in just a second, because we get the Louisiana Heavyweight Championship match.
The main event in the middle of the show. Yeah,
in the middle of the show, it was not Junkyard Dog. It was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, also known as Hacksaw Jim Duggan for everyone who wanted to be sure, or his name is not Bill Watts. Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Tony Atlas. Babyface Tony Atlas and Duggan the heel, which is not something I expected. And it honestly, what did you think about just between the initial impression with this match, and then as we progress through the rest of the episodes, what did you think of pre-WWE Hacksaw Duggan?
Well, the context is that Hacksaw Jim Duggan is the reason why Junkyard Dog is no longer in Mid-South. Right. And Tony Atlas is a friend of Junkyard and wants to get revenge and take the title.
Right.
This was a title match, by the way.
And that's why Stagger Lee, quote-unquote Stagger Lee, not the real Stagger Lee, the Mid-South Stagger Lee, that's why Stagger Lee was I'm not JYD, and that's, I'm Stagger Lee, but I lost the Loser Leaves Town match, so I've got to do this for a while.
Loser Leaves Town match, and had to, Hacksaw Jim Duggan was so over as a heel, he became a babyface later on, which we'll talk about later.
Yep.
It was fun watching Hacksaw Jim Duggan not be cartoony.
Yeah, I like him as just an intense, no-nonsense guy who's got good morals or decides to do scummy stuff when he's around Ted DiBiase and Doink the Clown.
But beyond that, Tony Atlas, my God.
That man is chiseled.
so chiseled, you could see the women in the crowd ogling him.
Yeah, and you know what? He had a weird-ass charisma that I'd never seen before out of Tony Atlas. And it's just for the fact that I'd never really seen much Tony Atlas matches. And this didn't go on for very long because it turned into more of an angle than anything else.
Right, this was only, a 4 or 5 minute match? It starts with arm wrestling.
Yeah, which I thought was silly. You know, it's like, all right, well, dude, and then Atlas beats Duggan like 3 times, and then they get back up and actually start to wrestle. I thought that was very cheesy.
That was, again, the whole thing of Mid-South got corny from time to time.
Yeah, well, they sure did. And then they actually acquired him as part of the Midnight.
Yep. And then the Rat Pack shows up, and the tag team champions, DiBiase and Bourne, help out Mr. Duggan keep his title.
Yep. And, you know, Atlas got beaten down a bit, and then the Rat Pack goes and leaves, and the crowd is kind of pissed. And then we get something fascinating. We were talking about the good relationship with Texas.
By the way, it was a ref bump, by the way, which was the weirdest ref bump ever.
Yes. Because it was getting knocked into somebody, and then he got just like flown out of the ring.
No, Tony Atlas hit Matt Bourne, who takes a back bump and goes backwards, and the referee gets hit, and then that allows Jim Duggan to put on a loaded mask and hit him with a headbutt.
Yes, that was the finish. And so sometimes, folks, when you're like, "Oh, well, wrestling was always serious," I was like, "Well, it's mostly serious."
Yeah.
But what was serious was this relationship with Houston, because in comes Paul Bosch to do commentary for the rest of the show, because there's talent from Texas here, as evidenced by Gino Hernandez.
Gorgeous Gino Hernandez.
That's right. And I forgot who he faced.
Mr. Olympia.
Right, and this was actually a surprisingly good match from both individuals.
Yes, although I will say this, even from behind the mask, you can tell Mr. Olympia does not have a good face.
Yeah.
Which is why it was very smart that he put on a mask.
Yes, absolutely. And it's and what I found interesting here was that there was a submission hold I think Gino was doing, and it took, or no, I'm sorry, it was Mr. Olympia who had it, and Gino had to get his shoulder underneath the ropes in order for it to count as a rope break.
Well, what it was that was a heel hook.
Yeah. So it had to get, but I still thought that was interesting, and under one of those weird Mid-South rules where you got to get your ass actually underneath the ring, in like underneath the ropes.
Which changed later on.
Yes, as did most of these rules. Then I thought Bosch was a great commentator, again, putting Gino over, doing it really well. Of course, Bosch was running Houston, but also was the voice of Houston. So it makes sense that he was here calling Gino's, except that that rope walk arm drag was nearly a disaster.
That easily could have injured somebody.
Yeah, that was about a split second away from being an absolute catastrophe. Thankfully, it wasn't. But
also, Gino Hernandez is very smart, throwing Mr. Olympia through the second rope and not the top rope, so he doesn't get himself disqualified.
Yep. And Gino was a good heel here. I mean, his stuff wasn't really fantastic, as it would be in 83, 84, 85, before his whole cocaine and paranoia and all that jazz. But his work was serviceable here, as was Olympia's. That turnbuckle evasion bump was tremendous.
Yep.
And the comeback definitely picked things up. And then they did this weird thing where I believe it was Olympia suplexed Gino into the ring.
No, other way around.
Other way around. But it was the other way around, but he couldn't go for the pin. So does that mean an over-the-top rope offensive mover in the ring was? Because he waved off the pinfall. Did the referee.
Because the referee told him you have to do a move that's inside the ring. So Gino Hernandez goes to the top rope. Well, to the second rope to drop an elbow.
And does his very strange-looking back elbow drop. Which he did in that match with Dusty that we reviewed. It's fine. It's just an odd move.
Yep.
And it was just this... I'm still kind of confused by Mid-South's rules here at this point with the way that is. But I'm starting to pick them up because this is stuff that one of the things for this whole thing with me is I didn't realize just how much stuff and how many rules I didn't even know existed in wrestling, or the little intricacies that have been completely demolished by WWE formatting.
Yep. Well, speaking of things that are getting demolished, this tag team match, Rick Davidson and John Davidson with the weirdest ponchos ever.
Yeah, it's the White Shining Stars versus Mike Sharp and Tim Horner.
Iron Mike Sharp.
That's right. And they mentioned the loser leaves town matchup that's going to be next week. Boyd Pierce, the plot device personified, talking about this match. Sharp and Horner.
Tag match.
What's that? What's that?
This was a tag match.
This was a tag match, and there was drop kicks that were pretty profusely bad. Remember that double drop kick from Sharp and Horner?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I didn't see it. 'Cause it was pretty rough.
This was not a good match.
No,
It was won by a clothesline.
Yep. By Iron Mike Sharp, who's one of the few people who you could say, yeah, he could probably win with a clothesline.
Yeah.
And
anyways, the next match, though, is the one that I really want to talk about. Because, again, we're getting to the good stuff.
Kelly Kinitsky and Buddy Landell.
Boy, I have not seen Kelly Knux. I want to see more.
He was pale. He was very
He was pale. He was pale, but hey, it worked for him.
Yeah, I mean, he was the son of Gene Kinitsky, which they mentioned, who was a legend in professional wrestling. Buddy Landell, for all of his problems, was always a quality worker, and you could see it here. I think Kelly Kinitsky kind of falls under a number of those promoters' sons that just didn't ever really pop in the business, and there's a long list of them.
Right, but there was something there. I just don't know if it. There was something there with him that I feel like maybe if things had shaken out, he'd be a bigger name.
Yeah, I just wouldn't know where, considering the kind of people that were going to be coming into the business in the next 5 years. Even with the territories, I mean, obviously Vince wasn't going to pick up a guy like Kelly Kinitsky. And considering that this match was done pretty much to just play me out, Johnny, the show. I
think it would have been better if Kelly Kinitsky would have gone west.
Yeah, it could be. It could be, but that was the end of this show. And while it was better than the first episode, it was still kind of felt... It was boring. I'm sorry. It was like the angles were good, but there's like one angle a show, and then the rest is just jobber matches to get people over, which is what it should be leading up to your super shows. But it was getting better because there was more talent, and it was clear that Mid-South was getting better people to come to Mid-South. Yeah, and that was further evidenced by this next year. Yep. And again, the whole thing with Mid-South was that things were getting better. Now they had a better graphic behind the announcers. The TV was starting to look a little bit better, too, because technology was getting better. And we have Jim Ross and his coif haircut. Yes, this is December 3rd, 1983, which, for my book, was one of the best. I mean, this is when I think Mid-South really picked up, was 1983. And it doesn't have as much to do with the Midnight Express as you'd think. I think there was a lot of other really quality things going on this show as opposed to the other shows. Well, it's 1983, 84, 85. Yeah. Like that 3-year span. Yeah. And even with 85, they got a lot of big names, but then of course the UWF had some success, and then, we all know how that ended because a certain promotion up north decided to go national. Right, but let's focus on this episode. We get Jim Ross again. It's great to hear young Jim Ross. It's so weird seeing him. Yep. And you know what else was weird? What? You know what I'm going to say. It is Barry Darso's lumberjack, big beefy bear lumberjack with the Daisy Dukes. Daisy Dukes Darso. That's a big dude wearing Daisy Dukes. And it was terrible. It was pretty rough. And you know what was even worse? If you watch some of the episodes prior to this moment, Barry Darso's promos as a babyface were bad.
Garbage.
They were boring. They were. I don't want to say they were nonsensical, but you could tell he was thinking about the words he was trying to say. And it just wasn't good. It wasn't working. But I think what was great about this is that the way that they built this and the way that Watts was putting over the athletic prowess of the Russians while still calling them treacherous was genius on Watts' part, because that sold the entire idea of why somebody would want or admire somebody like Nikolai Volkov later on when Darso won this match against Doug Vines, I think it was.
I have no idea.
I think it was Doug Vines, who jobbed for quite a few people in these next 3 episodes. This is where the jobbers started to get a little bit more name to them.
Recognizable.
Yeah, there's a little bit more recognizability in them. Not all the time, but Darso makes pretty much quick work of them. Does this great, like, backbreaker finish that's just like, it's just a wrenching backbreaker bear hug that caused them to...
It's a torture rack.
Yeah, but it's not quite the torture rack. It's like a torture...
It's basically a front-facing torture rack.
Yeah, but it's just over one arm as opposed to like in the fireman's carry position. But in any case,
I think it's technically called like an Argentine backbreaker or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Point though is that this show, the reason why this show got better is it got more focused, because it showed that Barry Darso is, well, Crusher Darso. But point is that Darso, they show that he can win matches on his own. He's a big, strong, good-looking athlete.
Yeah. And you note that Darso is still fresh off his match, so there would be a reason for him to be present to watch the next match that involved the person he quote-unquote admires, Nikolai Volkov.
Nikolai Volkov versus Dr. Death Steve Williams. It is a bold choice for Volkov to wear that noose.
It's also a bold choice in, 2 years or 3 years removed from the 80s Lake Placid Olympics and the still ongoing heat with Russia and the United States at the time, to have Nikolai Volkov beat the All-American boy, Dr. Death, for the first time ever on Mid-South television. And
with the Russian national anthem playing in the background.
Yep. And, I mean, that was the great thing about Volkov. And this... Now, we'll talk about this match, and then we'll talk about the finish of it, and I want to get your take on how this turn went down. So... Dr. Death, what did you think of very young, very green Dr. Death?
He's very green Dr. Death.
And he's fat.
There is a lot of... The wrestlers in the physiques that they have at this time is more barrel chest. There's a lot more barrel chest physiques in these wrestlers, especially Dr. Death.
Yeah, that was a couple barrels. That was a couple barrels full of bananas that he had. But Bill Watts was obviously a huge fan of him because the University of Oklahoma and all that athletics, that's right up Bill Watts' alley.
Well, he was trying to talk up Dr. Death so that way he would get, it would be bigger when Volkov beat him.
And honestly, Dr. Death, even though he was green, he still held his own in this match. He was just slow and he's still getting in. Obviously, Volkov led most of this. But the best part about this, I thought, was Volkov doing the hair pull, but making sure that when he pulled the hair, the referee was out of position to do it.
Right, he was only doing it to the back of the head.
Yep.
Pulling him down, which was clearly illegal, but he was clearly cheating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the people saw that, but the refs didn't. And that was great. And then the ref takes a bump. Then there's a ref bump.
There's a lot of ref bumps on this show.
Yep.
At least this ref is really, really small compared to the guys. So when he took the bump, he went flying.
Yeah, he sure did. Then they get the over-the-top rope.
What was his name? Pee-wee something?
Pee-wee Anderson.
Pee-wee Anderson.
Yes, who was quite an efficient referee in the Mid-South days.
I think he's probably my favorite referee because he's the one that his hand slaps are the best hand slaps, and he was really the one that was controlling things.
Yeah. No, Pee-wee Anderson was very good as a referee. And
right. And here's the thing is that he takes the ref bump and then Volkov does the over the top rope throw And here comes Barry Darsow, and he's gonna pick up
Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, and maybe help him out. No, he grabs him, attacks him, does his finisher.
He's not helping him, Bill. He's not helping him, which was the only thing we heard from Boyd Pierce in that whole match.
The only thing, though, is that when Barry Darsow picked up Dr. Death and started lugging him around, it looked like he was just dancing.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know if he really had a good grip on Dr. Death either when he went for that. I mean, he's a strong dude, don't get me wrong. You know, he's obviously a strong dude to bring him in, and then Volkov gets the pin, you know, when the referee's back in the ring and the fans are pretty pissed. Which you could hear better in this than you could in previous episodes.
Yeah, again, the audio quality was getting better. And Volkov picks him up over his head, almost drops him.
Yeah. And then then
he basically lands with his knee on Dr. Dev's ass.
Yeah.
He was trying to do a backbreaker.
But thankfully, everybody was okay. That final stomp that Volkov did off the second rope wasn't even close.
Oh, yeah.
No. It was not even close. But the damage had been done. They didn't care. The fans were pissed. And that was the whole point. And Darsow had turned, and of course they talked about that for a good portion of the matchup and for a good portion of the show. Actually, it was the closing segment on the show was talking about him, and then we get the third draw.
Hold on, we'll get to that in a second. We get to the next match. Joshua Stroud and Lanny Poffo. Leaping
Lanny. What a goof.
Hey.
He was a goof. Did you look at the way that he just gesticulated after doing that backflip? He's like, hurry, put him up. It was ridiculous. It was so funny.
Fair enough. But then we get Jim Ross, and then Jim Cornette proceeds to take the microphone away from Jim Ross. And Jim Cornette, you don't have a leg to stand on when you say the AEW wrestlers take the microphone away.
Well, but there was a point where Jim Cornette did that to get heat, which he did. But it wasn't like every single AEW, not like everybody took the microphone away from Reese or Bowden, or Jim Ross in this case. It happened very, very seldom.
Okay.
To get heat. As opposed to Sting just being like, go away, Tony. Ross, so yeah. Yeah, it's not like they just kick Tony to the side. Tony just sits there lounging on the ropes like he did with Don Callis that one time. It's like, what are you doing?
Also, what are these robes that the Midnight Express are wearing?
They're fantastic robes.
That orange sequin robe, like, come on.
Yeah.
Dennis Condrey, please.
Well, hey, Cornette's mother bought those, so I don't want to hear a word about Cornette's mother. So.
And then that little dance that Dennis does as Jim Cornette is taking off his robe.
Yep. This you could tell that they were meant for healing.
Fair enough. But this was basically Joshua Stroud, who was really, really in shape. Like, he was the best physically in shape, and you can also tell he was taking the most drugs. He was
built. He was built, and sometimes and sometimes you got to refortify the buildings. So that's what he was doing. But this is one of two matches that Lanny Poffo got to watch his partner get pinned by the Midnight Express. Poffo got put over here. Poffo got bumps on both guys of the Midnight, did his whole little hobbla hoobla bobbla boobla, I'm leaping Lanny. And
like, he literally got to do the head scissors thing, and then he does the backflip, and then he does the little, come on, put him up. It was almost Kenny Omega-esque.
It was ridiculous. It was straight up ridiculous, but it made me laugh because I'm like, all right, Lanny, whatever. Knowing what Lanny's career would turn into, I'm like, all right, man, go. I'd rather have Leaping Lanny than the Genius.
Yeah, I will give Leaping Lanny what he had because he didn't have much.
Yeah, and so then he takes Joshua Stroud, and then the heat comes on, and the heat keeps coming, and it don't stop coming. Dennis Condrey is so freaking good. They both are.
Yeah, but there was one point where he almost dropped Joshua on his head.
almost, but didn't.
Fair enough.
His matches would be, I mean, he was always good, but his matches, especially with the Midnight, would really drastically improve just in the next 2 years.
Also, that tag team finish nasty.
Yeah, absolutely. And they use that in the match that we see later on as well. But that big, just picking him up and then the elbow drop and flopping him down, and it worked really well. And now here's the interesting thing, because we have the feud that's going to be coming up is obviously the Midnight and 2 and TA. But if you had seen, like, I think it was the week before this one with the Midnight, this matchup with the Midnight, it was Midnight's debut. On that show, Lanny Poffo was making his debut and was making the pitch to be Magnum TA's partner so they could win the tag titles. And Magnum TA is like, yeah, I got no problem with you. And then Mr. Wrestling 2 comes up and goes, well, you know, I respect the fact that you want TA, but you and Randy and Angelo have done a lot of really nasty things in this business. You've tried to run territories out. And 2 just basically just goes off on him for what the Poffos did running a quote-unquote outlaw territory in Memphis and in Tennessee and all that jazz, you know, with ICW. And... well, and Lanny Puffel's like, that's not me. I'm not doing that here. I've left them to start on my own. You may know me with my brother and my father, but I am just leaping Lanny here, and I would love Magnum TA. And he echoed that as the guest commentator for this 2 and TA tag match.
Right. I'm sure this was a going on thing, which if we had kept watching, we could have gotten more of it. This was Magnum TA basically winning against Frank Levitt, who was a fat man.
Yes. And Schlub Lever, but God, you could see TA's potential as like, man, this guy could have been a world's champion. It's such a shame that car wreck ended his career.
Yeah, but hold on. The funniest thing to me out of the 5 episodes is seeing Mr. Wrestling 2 in a suit with a paper and pen writing down stuff ringside.
Yeah, that's us. That's us every time we watch shows.
No, but I'm just like... Mr. Wrestling 2 is basically 1 beer away from being the most interesting man in the world.
And you know what's great about Wrestling 2 as well? Is that he never took that... He would drive 10 miles away from the town he was in, take the mask off, and then 10 miles before getting into the next town, put the mask back on. Johnny Walker was dedicated.
But again, my whole point is that I don't think Mr. Wrestling 2 was taking notes. I think he was just making doodles.
That's very possible. Well, it depended, because he was on the side where the fans weren't, so it's very possible that that's exactly what he was doing.
And literally, again, the mid-match, basically when they would transition to commercial, they would take a still from the match, or like, what do you call it, a picture-in-picture?
Yeah, of the finish.
And the picture-in-picture for Magnum TA and Frank Levitt was literally Mr. Wrestling 2 writing down stuff on his notepad.
Well, because it was literally just about TA just getting a win over somebody who was not going to beat him to begin with.
Yeah. But then we get another match, which I thought was weird. Like, of all the matches, this was the weird one to me. Mr. Wrestling 2 versus The Missing Link.
This was the best match on the show.
It is,
weirdly.
But I'm confused and puzzled by the missing link. Like, what is the missing link?
So the missing link, this whole thing was that he'd had a couple screws loose. You know that old saying, you got a couple screws loose? Well, apparently he had a couple screws removed. And so this is what's left of his brain, but even Bill Watts was like, well, there may not be much left in that brain, but he recognizes that Mr. Wrestling 2's knee is a deadly weapon. And so, but you know, at the same time, you could tell that Bill Watts cares a lot about true sports, enough to where he made a lot of analogies to real sports to akin to what wrestling was doing. And I respect that a lot.
Right, there was a lot of references of football and other stuff.
And the NBA, like certain talent contracts and things like that. I think that's why I wrote that on this pod, because he mentioned something about basketball. It's amazing how much Mr. Wrestling 2 was doing without doing much of anything.
Master of Psychology.
Yeah, literally just a dancer, like a hobble forward, got Missing Link to back up. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant. I don't know what else to say. The magic of a knee lift being the theme of this match and the story of this match, and to seeing whether Wrestling 2 can hit it against a guy like the Missing Link. That's a basic story, simple story, and was very well told.
And they built the Missing Link as like, they built the knee lift as being like, in baseball, everybody has the same pitch. But some guys, they specialize in a pitch that really, really works well and wins you the game.
That's what I was talking about, yes.
Special pitch is the knee lift. It's like a curveball in baseball.
Yeah, and that's, the only other person I've ever heard say something like that regarding moves was Paul Heyman. And he said that in the old Stone Cold podcast that was on the WWE Network, where he was talking about if Mark Henry had a headlock that was better than everyone else's headlock, he could get the headlock over. And it's basically the same kind of logic. And I love that because it's sports. It's sports. And that's what the presentation of these shows was so sports-based, legitimate sports-based, that I could let a lot of the silly stuff go because I was immersed in the world of what they were trying to present.
Yep. Now, I don't think we need to talk much about it. It was a great match. Again, Mr. Wrestling 2, watch him.
2 got the knee lift and 1.
Yep.
It was wonderful.
The next match is Jim Duggan versus Tom Lennox, another jobber.
Yep. And
not much to say about this match. Hacksaw Jim Duggan is also very good.
Except his shoulder tackle is lame as fuck. That they kept calling the spear.
It's supposed to be a spear.
But he never lowers his head. He literally just pushes the guy down. He's like, all right, I win. And it looked better the later it got. But these first couple ones were pretty what the hell was that?
Well, speaking of what the hell was that, did you listen to this promo?
Of Darso's promo?
No, Hacksaw Jim Duggan's promo.
What I could hear of it when he wasn't talking away from the microphone.
I mean, yeah, and that was partially a sound issue. But there's an intensity in his eyes. You see it.
Yeah.
You see it when he's talking to the camera. And he's pointing at the camera. He's looking at the camera.
He means what he says. And the subsequent promo we get from Duggan in 85 further accentuates this point. Duggan could talk. Unfortunately, WWE made him hoe. And that really, again, that made these iconic characters, but at the same time, there's value in just the regular person.
Not even necessarily the regular person, but just not giving them a stupid gimmick that ruins them. Like, all Hacksaw Jim Duggan is known for now is, ho!
Yeah.
And winning the first Royal Rumble, and that's it.
And that's a goddamn shame, because this Hacksaw Duggan is somebody that I could get behind. As silly as his tackle finish is, but he's always... He was a pissed-off babyface. And this is where I wrote down in my notes, Watts always brought out the best out of people.
Well, speaking of bringing the best out of people, we get the Darso promo.
Which was okay. It was better than what he was doing, and he kept it brief.
Kept short.
Yeah, he kept it brief. So that was that, and of course, Darso and Volkov would end up having a lot of success going forward, which we'll talk about very shortly, because we have a show 6 weeks later, but we have to finish up our television time first.
With a really weird tag team match.
It was Tonga from the Isle of Tonga. That was literally that's what they said.
Yes, I know. And then King Carl Fergie of Memphis.
Yeah, and the ultimate irony of that is that during this, against the team of Mike Jackson, one of the best working jobbers of all time, we should watch more Mike Jackson, because honestly, he's a jobber, but he's good. He's really good. And a baby face, and a very baby Rick Rude.
A babyface young Rick Rude who was in tremendous shape.
Yeah, looked awesome. Looked absolutely awesome. And honestly, Fergie wasn't bad either. But it's definitely a Lawler rip. And the ultimate irony was King Carl Fergie, during this matchup, Watts is sitting there going, well, they had this whole thing with Lawler and Kaufman, and Lawler's going to be here next week.
I wonder how that went.
Well, the image in your head is of King Carl Fergie, who looks shockingly similar, and also did the fist punch off the second rope. You know, we're going to have the real thing here next week.
It's like they wanted to have Jerry Lawler here, but they couldn't, so they got the next best thing.
Yeah. But we did get a Mike Jackson Insecurity and a beautiful dropkick from Robert Roode. I mean, picture-esque.
Robert Roode at this point is very green, but he still had the best dropkick on the entire show.
Yeah. No, he was very good. And then, ding! All right. No more TV. Goodbye, everybody.
Well, it was a very quick chaos breaks down.
Yep. But just to be fair to this, every time that they had one of these and they were bringing up what was happening next week, they brought up names that I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to see I want to see what that's all about. I was left with all of these episodes wanting more, wanting to know what happened next.
Yet, it felt like they ended on chaos, craziness, confusion going down, not unlike AEW.
Yeah, well, I think that's a part of what, Tony saw in Mid-South. He watched a lot of Mid-South, but he absorbed all of it as opposed to just taking the really good stuff.
Fair enough. Now, as you said, the next episode that we watched was 1984, January 14th. The third episode was December 3rd, 1983. So you're right. It's only about 1 month, roughly.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, roughly.
And this was now this business picked up here, no pun intended, because now JR's on commentary. And boy, did that make a difference.
It made a difference, and this was easily the best of the 5 episodes.
I thought so as well.
Because this had the most focus. This had the most, we're here to do these storylines, and this is how we're going to do everything. And again, Jim Ross helps so much on commentary.
Yeah. And any words are better than no words, like Boyd Pierce was giving. and I like Boyd. I've got nothing against Boyd Pierce, and we saw him on the 5th episode as well. But God, what was he doing there on commentary?
Being there and collecting a check.
Plot device. Purely plot device.
Now, we begin the show with the Rushes in the ring, and thank God Barry Darsow got Trunks.
Yeah. Oh, he looked so much better. And
this was a little bit before he became Crusher Khrushchev, so.
Yes. This was, and then we get the surprise we get the whole previous, what happened last week, which was the debut of Terry Taylor, and dear God, how over was Terry Taylor?
Well, this was his debut. It helps that he's wrestling against arguably the hottest heel faction in Mid-South at the time, the Russians.
Well, that's for the moment. Because I think we might have a contender for that coming up in a couple, about halfway through this show.
But yeah, it's weird seeing a babyface Terry Taylor.
And not as a rooster. Over as hell. Terry Taylor was over. And it's like you look at this and you go, damn, what was WWE thinking ribbing Terry? There was a natural born champion in Terry Taylor if you look at this and the way that this was being responded to.
I mean, this is the thing, is that this was what kickstarted Terry Taylor's big feud with Nikolai Volkov and Crusher Khrushchev, and leading to the feud over the Mid-South TV title.
Yeah.
He became the first TV champion, the Mid-South TV champion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you could see why with the reactions he was getting over Darsow and Volkov. And then we have this tag match, which is Junkyard Dog and Duggan.
No. Doug Vines versus Terry Taylor.
Oh, right. We have that match. Well, because how long did that match last?
It didn't last that long. It lasted long enough for Terry Taylor to win in front of the Russians.
Right.
And the Russians tried to attack Terry Taylor.
And then Junkyard Dog and Duggan came into the defense, even though their match is next, because they're baby faces. And then we get this match.
Yep, you get JYD and Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Jeff Sword and Larry Higgins.
And who do you think would win this match?
Well, easily it would be the JYD and Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
And then Carl Fergie, and by the way, this is where we find out that King Carl Fergie was repurposed as a referee, perhaps because Lawler was pissed. And so Carl Fergie now a referee, but he did a good job. This is where I said that Duggan's spear barely looks like a push-off. And then, and now, I also noticed, and I'm sure you did too, this is now a little bit more drugs Junkyard Dog.
Yeah, this is not good, Junkyard Dog.
This was more junk than Yard Dog. and that's probably why Duggan did most of the work here. And
Duggan was basically having to carry and try and save this match.
And then we get Cold War chaos. As the Russians come back in, and then it's just a total haberdashery of Cold War tension. And I noticed this is like America. And it still got the USA chance. I mean, it was topical, so you got to give them credit for that. And it wasn't nearly as tasteless as it feels like now.
Right.
You know.
But again, the whole thing is that the JYD and Hacksaw Jim Duggan win, and then here come the Russians, and then the Jobber tag team tries to get involved. They're just like, you guys don't matter. Don't get involved.
Doesn't go over well. But you know, this is where you notice this is maybe one of the first few times that we've really seen JR on commentary, and he's been on a couple other episodes of Mid-South. But God, even in '84, this guy's a natural. You could tell that he's still a natural on commentary, even in 1984. And considering how much better he was going to get, it's pretty ridiculous. And then we get the reason I chose this show.
It's Mr. Wrestling 2 of Magnum TA versus Paul Gardner and Don Rawson, aka Who Gives a Fuck.
Except we don't get the match because there's a crime to commit.
Yep. Very bold of Jim Cornette to get in the middle of the ring with everything.
Yeah. And well, because Jim Cornette knew that he had backup. And he goes, we warned you that we weren't going to be messing around. And now you're going to pay the price. I called you a bunch of chickens for not wanting to fight us. And now we're going to prove it to you. And in comes the Midnight. And the other two, the two schlubs are just kind of left laying. And I forget who it was.
The two schlubs left are like, we don't need to be involved in this. And then they attack Mr. Wrestling 2, they knock him unconscious, and they tar and feather Magnum TA.
It's with a flapjack, as they called it. But I love the phrase from Bill Watts. The Midnight Express have Pearl Harbored 2 and TA. What? What does that even mean?
they bombed them?
Yeah, apparently. And the thing is that they got in and got out, and they got the heat and got the hell out of there.
Yeah, the fans were on their feet. They were angry.
Yeah.
And they were starting to throw trash. There was literally guys who were throwing cups, and they had to get the kids out. Like, literally, the kids were ringside, and adults were getting, like, you don't need to see this.
Adults were getting pissed. That got real heat. That got legitimate heat. And this was another thing about the formatting. This isn't like heel acts now where they sit there and they walk around and they look and they're conflicted. Then they stand and they wait and they look at the chair for like 20 seconds. They slowly walk up to the chair, grab the chair, throw the chair in the ring, come back in, look at the chair, look at the guy. The referee's going, no, stop it. And the other guy looks at the chair. And then he picks up the chair, and then he looks at the chair, and then he thinks about his life, and the referee's going, no, please, no, don't do it. And the guy's just standing there looking at the chair.
Okay, you made your point.
And then he hits the chair onto the stomach, and then he walks away.
The point is, you're a bad guy, you have no remorse, do it.
Get in, get out before people get hot.
Yep. Now we get the Midnight actually wrestling versus George Wingroff and Leaping Lanny Poffo again.
And George Weingroff was surprisingly over here.
Yep. But I also like the little feature, the fact that the ring crew couldn't clean up all the feathers and the tar, so it was in the rest of the ring for the entire night.
Yeah. And you know what? The Midnights are such dicks, but they still get an entrance. That's funny. You get in, you do a heinous deed, and then you still get allowed entrance music to come into the ring. That's hysterical. And apparently, during this match, a punch that sends you over the top rope apparently is not a toss-out over the top rope, which I think is kind of a distinction without a difference. But I'm not the one making the rules. But the over-the-top rope thing, I'm still kind of confused as to what counts and what doesn't count. Because it's changed with most matches. Then Bobby, and then they get the heat to Bobby and Condrey, and I love when Lanny's trying to get the tag to Weingroff, and Condrey's holding the leg, and to stop Lanny from getting the tag, Bobby Eaton just walks over and sits on Lanny's head. That stops him from moving, and that was enough to keep the heat going. And then the Midnight do more heel tags. They just keep doing it, and this was, I mean, it was honestly a solid match, all things considered. You could tell the Midnight do better than anyone at this heel tagging. In any of the shows and any of the Mid-South we watched up to this point, the Midnight definitely did heel tagging the best. Sky? You still with me, buddy? I think we might have lost Sky. We might have lost Sky, folks. We might have lost it. Are you alive?
Can you hear me?
Yes, speak.
Okay, here's my thing is that, again, the Midnight this was easily the best tag team match of the entire thing that we watched.
Yeah,
All 5
yes,
episodes.
100%. 100%.
And also, did you catch the tag team that they were planning on introducing
Next
at
week.
the end of the show?
Yeah, next week was the Rock and Roll. And we didn't get the chance to see it. And we'll talk about why. Not only just because it wasn't one of the ones that we picked, because we would have seen it going forward into 1984. But this was still, I mean, there was still a lot of 2 and TA to be wrestled.
Well, 2 and TA go up next. And my God, Magnum TA and the Feathers.
Yeah. And you could tell the intensity of both 2, who was pissed, but even TA, he almost had that, like, this is the most humiliating thing to happen to me. And you could tell he got angrier and angrier. The more he talked about it, the more that he got into it, the angrier he got. And you believed that they were ready to kick somebody's ass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Bill Watts, by the way, getting out from commentary to do the interview because he's the owner of the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was when Watts was doing the most. Doing commentary. He was out there. He was wrestling occasionally. You know, it was all there. Then we get one of the weirdest people that I see in Mid-South. Jim Neidhart won a squash.
Did Jim the Anvil Neidhart kind of look like a fat Sami Zayn?
You know, I never put 2 and 2 together, but now that you mention it.
This was a squash, although Jim the Anvil Neidhart, he was very intense. He was rocking the ring back and forth. He was very aggressive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's still Jim Neidhart. For God's sakes. It's still Jim Neidhart. But it's fascinating to me to see just how many people on this show were not on the next show for various reasons, and one of those people would be Jim Neidhart.
Yep.
But
anyways,
then
the next match is the main event, right?
It's it's not the main event like leaving for television time, but it's definitely the most investment of any of the matches. It's Dr. Death versus Crusher Darso.
There was the people's main events.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, this match was also pretty good.
Yeah, but again, Dr. Death is still, green.
He's still green, but he's better, and he's in better shape.
Yeah, and hot start against Crusher Darso.
Yep, hot start. He's pissed. obviously, because of what happened previously with Dr. Death, obviously a good old American boy against Darsow, who betrayed his country. Barry Darsow does the double knees to stop Dr. Death's second rope splash, and Bill Watts was like, oh, double elbows.
Except for the fact that Dr. Death literally positioned himself to land on those knees. It was unintentional, but clearly planned.
Yeah, it was. But you could tell almost immediately that Darsow got so much better once he turned heel.
Yeah, because it was a natural heel.
Yeah. Oh, it was definitely... it worked so well for him, just getting that turn.
Even if it was gratuitous, the amount of American Russian thing, like, I know that was the flavor of the time, but...
Well, and that was also very, very much Bill Watts. Watts definitely loved doing the U.S. versus Russia thing, keeping that American pride thing strong, but he also knew his audience. So he knew his audience was going to go into that as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about Mid-South. The things that are going to get people angry are Russia and tar and feathers.
Yeah. And then Dr. Death does the gut punch, which was big. Obviously, he brings prestige to it. And then Volkov comes in, and they start kicking the shit out of Dr. Death. And the first thing I thought of was like, man, what is this, Skylar in Los Angeles?
Shut the fuck up.
Or myself in Hartford. Or Norfolk.
Pretty much.
Or Norfolk. It's just
by the way,
lots of heat.
Punch to the back of the head is all it took.
Yeah. Lots of heat on this show.
Although, if you notice, what happened is that Nikita hands something to Crusher, and he hits him in the back of the head, and when he did the cover, he had his hand behind Dr. Death's body.
That's right.
So the ref never saw that he had literally a piece of wood.
Yeah, I wasn't positive exactly what that was.
It was basically like a piece of wood.
Yeah.
That was handed to Crusher Darsow from Nikita.
And the fans got hot again. But you know what? They had to do this so that Crusher and Volkov got their heat back. Because they had to before the end of the show. So it made sense why they were doing it.
Now, the next match is really interesting to me. It is Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Rick Rude.
I would like to watch a lot more Butch Reed.
This was a weird combination because this is very early in Rick Rude's career, and he's going up against a very, very experienced Butch Reed.
Yeah. Well, and this was good for Rick. I thought that Reed did a really good job of showcasing Rick and making him look very good. You know, they hyped up the fact that Rude, if he went to a draw with Butch Reed, that'd be major for his career. You know, they hyped it up.
Not even winning the match, just going to a draw.
Yeah. And they hyped it up as something that Rick Rude should aspire to, and it showed that they have some faith in Rick Rude, that he could be something.
I think that's the thing, is that the Mid-South actually had a lot of talent. It's just that they got all taken by the guy up north.
Yeah, which we'll talk about in a second. And then Bill Watts has one of my favorite lines, is like, I still can't believe that Cornette and the, I don't know what you call it, the chickening of Magnum TA. I've watched just put these random lines in that would just crack me up. And I don't know what it was. And he's being completely straight about it, right? He's being completely normal and like just selling it off as something like this is egregious and harumph. And just like every so often he would say something like that would just crack me up.
I mean, Bill Watts is a hilarious man, but he's playing it for straight.
Yep. And then then there's that dodge of the ropes so that Rude lands like neck first on the ropes, which was nasty.
That should have ended the match, honestly.
I agree, but Butch Reed got another move in and got the pin with seconds to go on the TV time.
Well, the problem with this is that he lifted up Rick Rude in the gorilla press position just to slam him down, and that was wasting time.
Which was probably the whole reason they did it. Knowing what their time constraints were, but you gotta give them credit. They always hit their time marks. Nobody went over on this show.
Yeah, the previous, they got better at the time marks.
Yes, and it was a good match. For what it was a good match. And it showed that they still have faith in Rick Rude, even though he didn't get the pin, and they really boasted up how valiant an effort it was against a guy like Butch Reed. And this to me, this was my favorite of the 5. But I think that what I'd like to do at some point is to do another examination of Mid-South and just watch like 5 straight episodes. So you can see how the stories progress less in a vacuum like we're doing right now.
Would have been more interesting, but we have to move on to the next episode, the last episode, and the one that unfortunately it lost more time because of the damage to tapes.
Yeah.
But at least we're finally in a proper studio. And not only are we in a proper studio, but they finally changed the intro package.
Yes, they did. And this was November 16th, 1985, and a lot had changed. This is post-WrestleMania Mid-South. What's glaring about this show isn't necessarily the names that are on it, but the names that aren't. Junkyard Dog's gone. The Midnight's gone, even though they went to Texas technically at this point. But I think by November of 85, they were out at Crockett.
They were at Jim Crockett.
Yeah, but they had gone to World Class first.
Right, but the point is that they're in Jim Crockett now. So is the Rock and Roll.
Yep, and the Rock and Roll moved there as well. So they're gone. Duggan wasn't far behind. This show rode off, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth in a second, rode off Ted DiBiase to go work Japan. And
before he joined WWF.
Yeah, well, he would come to the UWF again in 86 and have a little bit of a run, but then, shortly thereafter, he was gone. But Tony Atlas is gone. Just a lot of, not even just the people before. We had, Darso's gone. He's there for, he's now Smash.
Well, again, the whole thing is that when Vince McMahon set out to go national, he had to target the companies that also wanted to go national, and the 2 big ones were Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-South, because Watts had wanted to go national too.
Yep. And Volkov's gone as well. Volkov's in WWF at this point. So there was a lot of things that were different. This is after Mania and Crockett Palooza. So there was a lot. It was a much different face, particularly serial killer Joel Watts. You thought Bill Watts' stare into the camera was bad. I took one look at Joel and I'm like, oh man, he gonna kill somebody.
Well, the one that really looked like it was gonna kill somebody was Hacksaw Jim Duggan with that cut on his face.
Yeah, but he was pissed for a different reason. Although I thought JR's intro, did you catch this? JR's like, we got so many people on the show. Ted DiBiase's here, Ric Flair's here, Hacksaw Jim Duggan is here. He'll be here. I'm like, he is here. He's right next to you. What do you mean he'll be here? He's right here. And,
right here, right now.
Yeah, but God, Duggan looked badass. He was more intense than anything he ever did at the E.
Yeah. Again, it's just a shame. Now, we get the whole thing of the video package that happened with Mr. Hacksaw. Damn it. Butch Reed. I don't know. There's 2 Hacksaws now. It's really annoying.
That's right. It is confusing.
Butch Reed beating Ric Flair, and then Ric Flair getting some help in a 2-on-1 assault.
That's right, from Dick Murdoch.
Yep.
Who looks insanely badass, by the way.
Yep. By the way, were Butch Reed and Jim Duggan a tag team?
Butch Reed and Duggan had issues with each other for a while. But then, they feuded for quite some time in Mid-South. We just didn't get a chance to glimpse at it, which is why he says, desperate times call for desperate measures, and, if I have to team up for a greater cause with somebody I don't like and have fleshed it out with before, I will do that. And
character development.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I mean, that's years of them being in Mid-South, all laid out together. Said, I'll be there to help you. And the thing that I realized is that Flair being brought in definitely helped Mid-South, but displayed the situation of talent
again,
being
it's
taken.
NWA bringing in its biggest name, which is what you do when you got a big show you want to sell.
Yeah,
bring in the NWA World Champion.
And the crowd loved Butch Reed, and the reason they loved Butch Reed is because they did not have JYD as their black babyface, and Butch Reed fit that bill perfectly.
Until he was gone.
Until he also left for the WWE. But, what was great about that, what was done here in this angle that they did as far as Butch Reed goes is you could hear, especially with the pile driver with Dick Slater, which is why I misspoke. It's Dick Slater here and it's Dick Murdoch later. But Dick Slater does the pile driver, and you could hear the actual screams of horror coming from the crowd. Legitimate screams of horror from the crowd. But it was a solid angle, and it obviously got a lot of heat. And then Flair did a pretty good promo that Dick Murdoch interrupts and says, no, I'm the one who should have this title, not Ted. And Flair's like, I don't know, talk to the guy who makes my matches. Like, I don't know, that's got nothing to do with me, bro. And that interruption I thought was very underrated because you could definitely feel the tension. And I think Dick Murdoch did a great job with everything he did on this show.
Yep. Now, we get the whole Ted DiBiase and Ric Flair thing until Dick Murdoch comes in and does the sucker punch.
Well, first of all, we got to give credit. Boyd Pierce is back, but this time he's doing something that he's really good at, which is ring announcing.
Right.
And they go in and this... Now, Ric Flair versus Ted DiBiase, to me, is like a dream match. I don't think we ever got that in WWE, at least as far as like what they ended up becoming.
And it's weird seeing DiBiase as a babyface.
Yeah, but the crowd was really into him. He had a rich legacy in Mid-South. And then...
But here's the thing. Dick Murdoch comes in, starts mouthing off about wanting the title shot. They start fighting with each other. Ric Flair starts backing off like, this is not my problem. And then the second he gets a chance, he kicks DiBiase in the back when he's not looking.
Yeah, but then Murdoch goes and just lays him on the outside and then does this ram into the post, into the ring post. I don't believe this was Hardway, but holy God. That juice.
That juice was deadly. Like, it could have been really bad for his health.
You were wondering why it took until the last show to finally get a viewer discretion is advised. That's why. It was nasty. It was like, I would equate it to Eddie Guerrero Judgment Day 04.
Oh, yeah. But the best part of this whole thing is that DiBiase gets laid out, and Ric Flair has the microphone brought over and says, well, I guess he can't compete, so I'm going to be gone later.
But what a heat-kidding cop-out that was. And, because if I bought a ticket, I would have been pissed. And I would have wanted to go see another show. But thankfully, that was not the end of the story.
Right.
And
now, they get back, they say DiBiase wants to compete, and he will compete later on when he gets healthy. Now, we get Hacksaw Jim Duggan beating up a masked jobber.
Now, something I want to mention here, something I'm a little annoyed about, and I'll put Bill Watts on blast here. Why, Bill, did you not want to mention, for whatever reason, that Hacksaw Jim Duggan was from Glens Falls, New York? Because he said he's from New York State, but what is it about Glens Falls specifically that you don't like? Because I used to live next to Glens Falls. I've been to Glens Falls. That was where the only movie theater in like 50 miles was. And it's a good town.
Because it's not as impressive as New York.
But it's still he said New York State, not New York City. Said he's from New York State, so what damn difference does it make? Anyway. Sorry, a little personal there.
You're picking the smallest of them.
Yes, I was getting a little upset about that. But in any case, the clothesline and the charge looked way better here than they did in previous matches with Duggan. And so anyway, that's the way that worked out. So then Watts going in and cutting the promo saying, this is how we do it. We're giving the people what they want. It's as, I love that legitimacy to it. I 100%.
DiBiase saying he wants to compete. He wants to compete for the fans and he wants the title. That's how badly he is. He's willing to put health in risk. And basically Bill Watts is like, okay, but your health and safety is important.
Yep.
And this was bloody as fuck.
Yeah. Oh, no, and honestly, this match was tremendous. We did have a Dr. Death squash as well. He just came to help. That's right. He just came over to help, but he still looked very good. I loved the fact that Joel just doesn't have Bill Watts' delivery.
Yeah.
He just doesn't. It's just not the same as Bill. You can hear bits of Bill in Joel, but it's just not the same. But this match was fantastic. I implore any of you to take a watch at this, because it's definitely worth watching.
We could talk about it, but it doesn't do justice. Watch the match.
Yeah.
Although, again, it does get bloody.
It's very bloody.
DiBiase may have cut too much.
Yeah, they did the viewer discretion is advised, which it was very bloody. Flair got covered in Ted's blood, but they did this big with a beautiful count-out finish, which made sense because Ted just couldn't move anymore after a gutsy comeback.
Although there was that point when DiBiase did put Flair in the figure 4 and you thought maybe he was going to win.
Yeah.
And he would have, if he would have put him in the center of the ring, he tries to do it, Ric Flair shoves him out of the ring. And DiBiase takes an exaggerated bump to the outside, but
perfect. And then Murdoch comes and hits a brainbuster on the concrete, which was the hospitalization angle so that he could go work Japan. And that hospitalization angle became the angle of the rest of the show.
Yep.
And
I mean, they get the miscellaneous tag match next, which is the Bruise Brothers versus a couple of guys.
Yep, and the Bruise Brothers win. It was very short, but they talked about Ted's hospitalization the whole time. And then to finish off the show, they had the Nightmare and Eddie Gilbert, managed by Oliver Humperdinck, against a couple of jobbers again.
Perry Jackson and Steve Constance.
Yep, and the most interesting thing was that Eddie Gilbert hit a flapjack into the ropes, and that was the finish. And then they showed footage of the rest of the show, of the hospitalization. They said that there was going to be a match to end the show. Maybe Jake didn't show up for it. I don't know. It involved Jake Roberts. Could have been a no-show. Probably just wanted to sell the hospitalization angle. But in any case, they used actual medical references, and then that was the show. JR closed it out.
So, what are your final thoughts about Mid-South?
Well, why don't you go first before I give my take here? Because you're the one who actually had not watched a whole lot of Mid-South. So what's your impression of your first territory deep dive?
Well, I think, again, the reason I picked Mid-South is that from what I heard, it is the epitome of 80s wrestling, particularly early and mid-80s. And yeah, this kind of was the barometer. And it's interesting to watch future territory deep dives, how it compares.
Absolutely. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of strange. There's a lot of get in and get out and get it done. But everything's professional. Everything is sports-based. Everything is framed. This is kayfabe done right, is the way that I would defend it. If there was a 2022 facelifted WW, or just not even WW, if there was a Mid-South reboot that matched 2022's facelift and had this kind of legitimacy, with this kind of talent, guaranteed it would draw. Guaranteed.
And hopefully one day it will.
And this was the epitome of that. And hopefully somebody could come up with some semblance. But Mid-South, I do want to have this be something of a part 1, and we could segue into a part 2 where we watch more of a string and see how the booking, we'll do more an introspective into the booking. But all in all, this was really fun. I'd like to do more territory deep dives. This was a great thing. Skylar, thank you so much for suggesting this.
Yep. Now, next month, we'll do another territory deep dive. Any territories you want to look at?
Well, we will either... I'm not sure yet, because I'd like to look at the AWA, but there's a lot of AWA to sort through. We could go through early Crockett, which would be Mid-Atlantic, but I think we might end up doing World Class.
That feels like the natural progression, because we gotta move west to the next company, right?
So stay tuned, folks, because this is not going to be the last territory deep dive. This is going to be something that we do on a fairly regular basis, that will...
However, you will only hear about it if you like, share, and subscribe to the Court-Martail podcast.
That's right, folks. There is a way to do it. You know the way to do it. And, folks, until that time, we've got ACPW and NWL next week. There's fallout from major shows. There's a World Cup starting. There's a new World's Champion in Cody Rhodes. The only way you're going to stay tuned to that fantasy booking is to do everything that Skylar just said. But until we get to our shows, it's time to go to our first commercial break. Skylar, great job today picking the show, leading the show, and being an overall great co-host as we dove into the past.
You're welcome.
And folks, we are now putting this podcast into the past, and we will see you in the future right after this.